Welcome back to part 4 of the pre-course training. So again, my name is Antonio Ross, and we're going to be talking about identifying the signer and also recording in the notary journal. All right, so let's go ahead and get started and move forward. All right, so firstly, identifying the signer. So there are 4 ways to identify your signer. The first is that if you have personal knowledge. This means that this could be someone you know, such as a friend, family member, co-worker, simply someone that you don't need to identify because you have personal knowledge of who that person is. Second is to have an acceptable ID document. Again, we'll go into this a little more in the specific ID documents, but as we stated previously, this can include a driver's license, identification card, military ID, all of those as long as they're unexpired and it does have the name of the person who's signing. The third option is one personally known credible witness. So this must be someone that you know personally who can vouch for that person who's going to be signing. So again, an example of that would be someone such as a friend, co-worker, family member that you know and you know their identity, and then they are vouching for the person who's signing. So in that case, you would get both of their IDs, verify their information, and that would be how you would validate that that person is who they say they are. And actually, let me just backtrack on that on one statement. So in the third option, if you personally know a credible witness, then that would actually be, so what you would do is you would write down that person's name as you personally known, and then you would put a note there that they vouch or say that they are personally know the other individual. So in that case, actually, I did say you needed an ID, but you would not need an ID in that case because you personally know the individual. Then the fourth way is 2 credible witnesses with ID. So in this case, these are credible witnesses that you do not know. So this could be a family member of the person who's signing, or a family member, or anyone, a neighbor of that person, or your neighbor, or whoever. It could be really almost anyone who can say that they have to have their IDs. So they would have their IDs that you would utilize for verification, and you would write their information down in your journal. And also, I would suggest putting a note that it was 2 credible witnesses with ID. And again, as it shows here, you do not need to know them personally in this case, okay? All right, so we're going to move to the next slide. All right, so more in depth of how to identify the signer. So these are just some additional ID verification items that you could utilize that we hadn't or have actually mentioned in some cases previously. So just a kind of a more expansive list. So it could be a U.S. passport that they provide. They could provide a foreign passport, a state driver's license, or non-driver's ID, which we talked about, military ID, certificate of citizenship or naturalization, or a permanent resident card. Those are all acceptable forms of ID for verification of the identity of the individual signing. Okay, now there are some unacceptable forms of ID. Those include, so if a signature on the ID has an initial, but the signature on the document has a full name. So for example, if the ID shows as, say their name is Frank Green. So if it's F Green on the ID, but the document says Frank Green, that would be unacceptable because the ID is a shorter version of the name. If it was the opposite way around where the ID said Frank Green, but they were signing F Green, that would be acceptable because the F would stand for Frank. So the ID needs to be the most expansive. It needs to be the most detailed item, okay? So next is if the ID has a suffix such as junior or senior. So if it has a suffix, it must also be on the signature of the document. So for example, if your name was John Doe Jr., okay, if it's John Doe Jr. on the document that they're signing, okay, so but the ID says All right, let me just double check it. So if the ID has a suffix, junior or senior, it must also be on the signature. So let me just backtrack on that one just real quick. So if the ID says John Doe Jr., okay, but the document says just John Doe, okay, that would not be acceptable because the idea is that if someone, sometimes you have a senior who doesn't have senior behind the name they represent. So for example, it could just be his father who's just John Doe, okay, but the ID says this is John Doe Jr. So John Doe and John Doe Jr. are not necessarily the same person. So again, if the document says just John Doe and the license or ID that you're using says John Doe Jr., then that's unacceptable. The document should also say John Doe Jr. Okay. All right. So that can be somewhat confusing, but the ID in the document, how they're signing, should match. Okay. Now another unacceptable ID is if there's a double surname on the ID, such as Williams Black. Then in that case, that double surname should also be on the document if that's how they identify themselves. Okay. All right. And again, if you have any questions about this, write those down and we'll talk about them in the full training that we have. All right. So we're going to move to the next slide. All right. So the next is about identifying with a credible witness. Okay. So as we talked about previously, it must be, if you're saying, a credible witness, it can be one person that you personally know, okay? So if you personally know that individual, that will serve as the identification for the signer, okay? However, the other options, if you don't know anyone, and say, for example, the signer doesn't have their ID, the option would be to have two credible witnesses with ID. Now, the word credible is really subjective. So it's really up to you if you determine that those individuals appear to be credible. All right. So they would have to have ID, and essentially they'll be vouching for the signer, but you have to get their identification. And then right here, there's a few things we say here that it must be someone who seems honest and reliable, someone who's impartial, so who isn't actually affected by the document. So if the document is, if it's a husband and wife who's on the document, the husband cannot serve as a credible witness for the wife because he's part of the documentation that's being signed. So that wouldn't be acceptable. And the witness must swear to a supreme being or on his or her own standing. So again, like we said, a supreme being could be a judge, but in most cases that won't be the case, and they will just be swearing upon their own standing. So that and this is just here, you see some sample language that you could ask, say, do you solemnly swear that the signer truly holds the identity he or she claims? So help you God. This is one example. You don't have to say that, but it is something you can say. Another example is, do you solemnly affirm on your own personal honor that the signer truly holds the identity he or she claims? Okay. Okay, so that's just pretty much how you could do the it's somewhat of a swearing in, to assume that to state that they are being truthful, essentially. All right, so let's go to the next slide. All right, so now we're going to just shift gears a little bit and talk about the journal. This, and you see here on the side, this is an example of the journal. Okay, so let me see if I can maybe open this up without going to the next one. Give me one moment here. Okay, so I'll show you at the later. Just kind of open that up, but for now, the journal. There are different parts of the journal, but the idea of the journal is it helps protect you if you're ever challenged by such as someone sues and they want to validate that a document was signed. This is your protection in case something is challenged. Okay. And the one thing about a journal, you should not have more than one journal in use at a time. Okay, so that means it's simply that you can't you have multiple journals, but you should have one completely done and completed in all pages, either voided or filled out before you move on to another journal. And you really shouldn't leave any blank spaces on a journal. So if there's anything that's not completed, you should put one line through it. You can put NA across it. So you shouldn't have any blank pages, blank spaces on the journal. Okay, so if something's not applicable, you can put NA. Now, in the other typical format is that it will be a chronological order. Okay, so you're going to go, so the most recent will be in the front, and as you work your way to the back, your oldest will be in the front, and then as you work your way back, it should be the most recent. Now, in terms of procedures, you should make a separate journal entry for each signature that you have, and a separate journal entry for each document. And you typically will complete the journal before you sign or seal the document that you're signing. So generally, when you first start, you want to go into doing the journal. We'll get into the order of how you proceed through the process a little bit later in the course. It won't be part of the pre-course though. So this is an example of a journal. This one is a little bit different in terms of the number of times. This journal that's actually on the side here is actually intended more for being a notary signing agent. So it takes away a lot of the duplication that's required in most journals. Okay, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So let me go to the next slide here. All right, now this right here is an example. So I think what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to pull up this entry here. Actually, let me go back. And I just want to talk through some of the, 1 second. I want to talk through some of the points here. So give me a second while I open up that particular document and share that. Let's see here. So I want you to actually be able to see a completed version of this. So I'm going to stop. Let me share, see if I can just share that document by itself. Okay, let's see. I think, let's see, let me say share. Okay, I'm not sharing. Let's see if I'm sharing the right one for you. All right, so new share, and I want to share this document, which is the completed version. Actually, okay, I think I have it now. Okay, so we're going to share, I want to share this screen. At least I think I'm sharing it. Let's see. Screen 1. Okay, share. Okay, so I think I'm sharing the right one, and hopefully I am actually sharing it with you. But this share, what I'm doing here is I'm showing you the document that we're actually talking about. So this document, this particular journal, I'm sorry, is actually, this is a completed version of the journal. Okay, so the way this works is, and this is specific to this particular journal. Every journal can be set up just a little bit differently, but this is the one that I would actually suggest for anyone who's a notary signing agent, because this is the format, and it takes away a lot of the duplication that exists in a lot of other journals. So with this journal, what you're going to do is you're going to put the date and the time at the top. So you have the date here, the time that you actually perform the notarization. And then here, a lot of this is pretty self-explanatory, but the name of the signer. So if there's one signer, you'll put just their name, and then for the signer two, you'll put NA. In this case, there are two signers. So we say Joseph Edward Signer, and then Mary Elizabeth Signer. Then the address. And again, if this is another thing that takes away, like I said, duplicate. Instead of putting the address again, you'll just put a check mark here if they have the same address. If not, you'll fill out their address. You'll put the telephone number. And here, I would say, if you don't have a telephone number, I would put NA here. It's not actually here, but that's what I would do. And then you want to put the ID type. How did you verify it? In that case, it will be a driver's license. And in this case, you also did driver's license. And if you had a credible witness, you would put credible witness. And then if you do have a credible witness, I will put credible witness. And then I will probably put a note down here in the bottom under your notes. You can put notes as to what's particular situation, what happened. Anytime you have something out of the ordinary, you want to go ahead and put some notes down there. And then at the top here, you have the ID number. So if you look at the driver's license, you'll typically put the state. So in this case, I'm saying Florida. This is the driver's license number, and this is the date it expired. You'll do that for both signers. And then you would have them sign in your journal under signature 1, and then signature 2, you'll have them sign. Okay? And then again, you'll notice that this is a lot different from some journals. So you may see some other journals where you have to do a lot of duplication. Again, this is a journal I would suggest for a notary signing agent, or even a notary public if you're not going to be a notary signing agent. But I did this class is geared towards you being a notary signing agent. So the next thing is going to be the document date. What's the date on that document? And then the document type. It's going to be one or two that we talked about, either acknowledgement or jurat. So for the mortgage, it's the acknowledgement. So you'll go through, I won't go through every one here, but what you're going to do is you're going to put the date for each document, the type of document that it is, and then the description or name of that document. And then here, the client would initial if they had to complete or sign that document. So in this case, both sign. In some cases, only one or the other will sign. So some are actually specific to an individual. So they would initial based on how that document applies to them. And then all here, you'll just write no entry, or you'll put NA across the bottom, or you can just do a line. There's multiple options. They put, in this example, they put no entry for any lines that were not used. And then, like I said, this is notes in the notary sample notes section. Only if you have notes that are applicable. And this is, like I said, it's geared towards the notary signing agent. So it has your miles that you travel. This is something you can keep track of. And then the fee, typically you wouldn't put a fee here because I know we talked about being a notary public, there's a maximum fee. With a notary signing agent, that doesn't work the same. So we'll talk about that more later, but just be aware, I typically just put 0 here. And then there's a section, most journals have an option to do a thumbprint. I will tell you in Virginia that's not required, and I actually don't. You can do that for extra verification if you would like. I don't do that, and like I said, I'll leave that to you whether you want to do it or not. But I don't typically get a thumbprint. It's not required, and I don't actually get it. Okay, so let me now go back to the actual original screen that we were sharing. And this, again, just goes through all of the things we just talked about. Okay. So it goes through location and one thing that journal that we didn't actually have, it has the address that we asked for, but generally you also do put, actually let me go back, sorry about that. Usually you will put the address of the venue where the signing actually took place as well. But typically, it would at least be the county and state. Okay, and you'll see what some journals will ask you for that. Okay, and I won't go through all this because a lot of this is what I've already talked about. So recording the date, and then this also just talks about if you're performing an act with no document. Just put in there not applicable for the document name. So like we talked about when you're doing jurat and there's not an actual document, you would just put that, the date, jurat, and then for description of document, you just put no document or not applicable. Okay. And then like I said, you utilize your notes. So fill out that notes section and just kind of state what was going on and why you didn't have a document. Okay, and let's see. All right, and so this just goes on to talk about if you have a credible witness, you enter that person's name and information. Again, you'll put something down in the notes, just kind of stating what happened there. And then it goes talk about how you fill out the ID section, which we've already talked about, so I won't go through that again. And then thumbprint, again, we talked about that, not required, but it can be helpful. Another thing that again, every journal is a little bit different, but some journals will ask the number of pages that's actually part of that document. So if the document is for, such as example, a mortgage deed of trust, which typically can vary in page size, but let's say 20 pages, it would just put 20 pages as the page number, the number of pages, sorry, that document actually is. Again, this journal that we have doesn't actually require that you put the number of pages, but every journal will be a little bit different, so just want to make you aware of that. Okay, and then here, just you don't want to record any private information in the notes section, for example. You don't want to talk about how much money is involved or anything specific to the details of the document, just the high level, the name of the document, what type of notarization that you're doing, who's signing, that type of thing. Okay. All right. Well, that is how you do your journal and how you identify the individual signing. So again, we will see you in the next part of the video. You enjoy your day.